I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stone. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
It is Friday, the 1st of December, but on the final day of November, Christmas came early, at least for Al Michaels, who finally got a good Thursday night football game to sit through. And the rest of us did too. The Dallas Cowboys and the Seattle Seahawks was an absolute banger of a Thursday night game for a change. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about draft's upcoming cornerback class and the return of the Boo Boo Breakdown with Vic Troha now that we're clear of Thanksgiving. And in order to do all that, we need to welcome in the great Trevor Sikkema. How's it going, sir?
Dude, not only did Al get a good game, Kirk did as well, which is important for Kirk because the man's on the tail end of the college football season. So he's basically been burning the candle at both ends for like the last 4 months. And his weekend, I think, is Thursday Night Football, which happened last night, and then the Pac-12 championship, which is tonight. And then he flies to go do game day the next morning. So this man has a truly unhinged weekend of sports. And if it started with an absolute stinker on Thursday Night Football, it might have put the man's sanity over the brink at this point in the season. So I'm also happy for Kirk that he got to watch a good performance last night.
That's true. It's you know, that kind of the psychology of you need to start well, otherwise the day is going to be bad, or you know you need to get a hit in early, otherwise you're not going to be in the game flow, you know, in a football game. I mean, if Kurt had started that weekend with a standard Thursday night football slop fest and then had to go through the rest of his weekend, that might have been a rough weekend. We were talking about his sort of schedule though in the office up with Mitch yesterday. You know, you look at it and you're like, man, that guy, he's doing a game, then he's hitting the plane, then he's going to do game day and then another game or whatever. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's rough. But his traveling is not the same as our traveling, you know? Like,
no,
he doesn't have to spend hours in an airport, like in a horrible terminal, in a crappy chair with spotty Wi-Fi. You know, he's getting a limo to a private plane to another limo. Like the dog is lying across a private plane's couch. It's not the same, right? I think I could live with that kind of traveling.
The lack of being at home is not ideal no matter what.
Sure.
But for you to not be at home, he's basically traveling about as well as you possibly can. Because he's taking the PJ to the Thursday night football game. He's taking the PJ to the Friday night game, and then he's taking the PJ to the game day set. So my man's racking up the miles, but he's doing it in style. So you're right. There are worse ways to do his job. You wouldn't want to be like, there's like the Kirk Herbstreit line of like, once you get over it, then you're in a private jet for all of those flights. But right below the Kirk Herbstreit line, you're doing all of that traveling while also still flying commercial. And that's where you don't want to be. You never want to be just below the Herbstreit line.
Although doing it that way, you might get air miles. Like the one downside to Kurt's, I don't know that he's collecting air miles for that. You know, I don't think they have like a flyer program for the private jet.
It's true. But then at that point, you're thinking, his contract's probably high enough to where he doesn't have to worry too much about the other flights that he's booking when it's not football season. So
yeah, once you have enough zeros in the bank account, the purpose of air miles is probably gone out the window at that point anyway. So that is a fair point.
But that's good on you that you're thinking of the rewards, that you're a rewards guy. That's smart.
Well, when you have this kind of income, you're thinking about all the ways of saving money and maximizing, you know, whatever. Anyway. Speaking of securing your family's financial future.
There we go. Look at you.
Fabric by Gerber Life. Makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. It might be the smoothest transition I've ever done. I just stumbled right into it.
That's beautiful. You know, that just, again, like Kirk and Al got, you're starting the weekend, you're starting the show off with a bang. You know, it's going to be a good rest.
It's going to be a good one. So, am I correct in saying that this was the best Thursday night football game we've ever had?
I don't know ever, just because I can't recall all the Thursday night football games because I try to burn them all from my memory. Exactly. But no, this one was it was phenomenal, right? It was back and forth. It was two exciting teams. It was teams that certainly both have playoff aspirations, and it was really damn good quarterback play, right? I think that it's been up and down for the Seahawks. You know, there's been some criticism of Geno Smith over the course of this season, but man, he showed up in a big way, and the way that Geno Smith played last night, he deserved, I guess I'll use that word even though it's a loaded word, deserved to win that football game with all the huge throws that he had, how pinpoint accurate he was when his back was against the wall, third down pressure. I mean, that dude was absolutely lacing the football all over the field in such a fantastic manner. The only problem is he was going up against the hottest quarterback that we have in the NFL right now, and a guy who probably does not get enough love in the MVP conversation. I looked this up with Dak Prescott. Since week 6, he is far and away the highest graded quarterback that we have in the NFL. He's got a 95 passing grade in our system, and it's like 22 big time throws. It's like 2 turnover worthy plays, and even beyond some of the numbers and the data, he passes the eye test with flying colors. I mean, the confidence that this guy has in the pocket is unmatched right now. You're watching him. He is so light on his feet. His hips are pointing. It's funny because everybody kind of poked fun at him when he was going through his pregame hip drills, you know, like the one that went viral where he's just like trying to, you know, thrust to his butt. But he's doing that in the pocket. And because of it, he's staying so light and flexible, and there's so much power and there's so much accuracy and rhythm on all of his passes. You know, whether it's first down, second down, third down, whatever it was, Prescott was up to the challenge. I would argue that there is not a more confident quarterback right now than Dak Prescott and what we have seen from this Dallas Cowboys offense. And we saw it on display, and they put up 40 points last night against the Seahawks because of it.
Yeah, he's playing spectacularly right now. The offense is cooking. I think this was a really big game for the team overall, for his MVP candidacy, for their sort of reputation, because this was the game that was different to all the other ones, right? Every other game they've had at home was against a bad team. They've got out to a lead early, and they've just run away with it. This one is a pretty good team who smacked them in the mouth first, right? Like the Seahawks got out to the early lead. Dallas had to stay in it from their point of view. Dallas elected to take the ball rather than defer the way everybody does, you know, at the start of games now. They elected to take the ball, which gave the Seahawks that opportunity, which is why you defer, of getting the touchdown or getting a score before and after the half. And they did. So Dallas had to live with this Seahawks team essentially putting them in spots that they had never been in this season, and literally never been in. This was the first time they trailed at home this year.
I mean, that's impressive just to say, but also impressive, yeah, for them to get over it. And I think that, you know, the way that Dak is playing, to me, is trickling to the rest of the roster, and you're just seeing so much confidence from everybody. And, you know, like CeeDee Lamb believes he's the best wide receiver in the world right now. Deron Bland certainly seems like he thinks he's going to get a touchdown every single week. Micah Parsons believes he can get by any offensive lineman that's standing in front of him. So the Cowboys are just playing so confidently right now, and you could tell they're getting the best out of their most talented players, and it allows you to continue to believe. And I think you're right. That was a really important part of what we saw from Dallas last night, is that is this a team that can kind of roll with the punches? Because it felt like the schedule has been pretty soft to this point. I think they flashed up the strength of schedule, and the Cowboys have one of the easiest strength of schedules, if I'm remembering that correctly from the broadcast last night. But you get into a situation where you've got to be able to win games like this. And this can be a springboard. I guess that's the theme of this podcast of, having something start strong and get you into something that's greater. You go down the rest of the regular season schedule and you're going to get into the postseason and you're going to be in dogfights like this. And I think unfairly, the narrative with Dak Prescott has been, yeah, sure, he has a handful of games where he stuffs the stat sheet and he has some really great throws, but he can't beat the big opponents. You can get, like that Eagles game that happened earlier this year, right? I mean, they were close. That game was close, but Philly ends up winning. And it's not a big victory that Dallas gets to take away. And I feel as though we have the best chance that we've ever had, which is saying something, for Dak to be able to correctly show people how good he is and how good this Cowboys offense is.
And I think it was a step in they're in a weird situation, Dallas, because they've been absolutely annihilating bad teams, and then the 49ers embarrassed them and they lost to the Eagles, and those are the two that they sort of need to bridge the gap to. This was a stepping stone in that direction, right? This was the Seahawks aren't as good as the 49ers or the Eagles, but they're on the way. They're on that pathway. And now the next game Dallas has is against the Eagles. The next game after that is at Buffalo, and then at Miami, and then Detroit and Washington. So their schedule gets harder. And if they do legitimately want to be, one of the class of the NFC, a team that's going to the Super Bowl, they need to find a way of crossing that chasm that they've between the teams they're able to destroy and the teams that have been beating them regularly in the last year or so. And I think this is an important stepping stone on that pathway, right? A way of bridging that gap is to go up against a good team who gave you several pretty big punches and then be able to rebound and get the win at the end of it anyway. Yeah,
and I think that this could have been a game, and I'm not going to say they're about to, roll off 4 straight wins against the Dolphins, the Eagles, the Lions. I mean, they could fare well against that schedule, and they certainly have the ability to do that. But this game against Seattle could have been a overlooked game for them, right? They look further on their schedule, and this is a team that firmly has the Philadelphia Eagles in their sights, right? You play them close. They're the class of the NFC right now. They went to the Super Bowl last year. They're the number 1 overall seed right now. And so it would have been realistic and even maybe in some ways understandable for them to look past this Thursday night football off game with the Seahawks, and their focus could have been on Philadelphia and the teams that kind of follow in that schedule, and it wasn't. And I think that they took care of business, appropriately so, and all the best teams in the NFL, even the ones that are putting up crazy points and know that they're going to win every single week, they'll tell you that, yeah, you got to be able to respect the opponent that you have every single week. And it's the ones that lose sight of that pick up a couple of extra losses throughout the regular season and then maybe aren't the team that they're supposed to be once you get to the postseason. And I feel as though Dallas is in a really healthy place when it comes to having this little run of playoff caliber teams that they're about to go up against and giving people a reason to believe that they're not only going to fare well against them, but perhaps even best some of these teams.
It seems strange to say this given the score at the end of the game, but it was a game where it felt like there was actually some pretty good defense being played as well. It wasn't just, one of those games where there's a ton of points, it's all offense, there's bad defense left, right, and center. There was actually some good performances on defense and some interesting plays and key defensive plays that made the difference. Our guy, Ben Stockwell, said to me that it felt like a game where both offenses sort of knew the rules to the opposing defense, which makes sense given the coaching connections, but that meant that the defensive coordinators, the play callers, were going like deep into the bag to find things that were still going to work because the opposing team, knew how to beat the sort of standard stuff that we call. So consequently, you had this really interesting game of like defensive play calls and what was getting dialed up. And ultimately, you can argue like there was a couple of big plays late in the game from Dallas's defense then end up being the difference, right? They get a stuff on 4th and short or 4th and 1, whatever it was, when they try to run Charbonnet, and then obviously that final play, 4th and 2, where Micah Parsons is just in the backfield ruining the play, and that's game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was watching, I agree with you. I didn't come away with that one thinking, man, we're watching two really bad defenses. I thought we were just watching a game where the phrase perfect offense is going to beat perfect defense kind of came to life in a handful of ways for both teams. And I go back to just how well both of those quarterbacks were playing. I mean, Geno had 3 or 4 throws that I can remember off the top of my head where he's fading away, back foot, sideline, just in the basket straight over the defender where only his guy could get it. And whether it was Metcalf, who had a huge game, Lockett had a couple of big catches, Jackson Smith and Jigba did as well. And so it was like, no matter who he was throwing to, shoot, that dime to Noah Fant was crazy. That might have been my favorite catch of the night, the way that he was able to go full extension and turn the body and still land with his back to the ground. So he didn't, get any question whatsoever, whether or not he was going to have the ball or whether he was in control of that ball. I mean, that was incredible too. So to me, I agree with you. I didn't think that it was, there were obviously some defensive penalties that held teams back that they're going to want back, but that's kind of just playing the game. No coach is going to accept penalties, but as somebody who's watching, you kind of understand that's what it's going to take, especially when you're going up against really good receivers like the Seahawks have, like the Cowboys have. It's just going to get handsy. It's going to get physical, and you're probably going to have a couple of flags here and there. So I don't even look at that and say, yeah, it was like egregious, it was crazy. I didn't feel that way. I just felt like they were doing whatever they could to try to slow down these offenses. And when both of these teams, and particularly both of these quarterbacks, were operating at that kind of a level, you're going to see more flags because it's going to get more frustrating. You're going to have to go, well, what the hell am I supposed to do to stop this? And you start towing that line a little bit more, and maybe that causes a couple more penalties. But to me, it wasn't that I thought that these defenses played poorly despite 41 and 35 points being given up. It was the fact that both these quarterbacks were just pretty much unstoppable last night.
I felt like a lot of those penalties were pretty ticky-tack as well. Like I thought the officials were erring on the side of, overly officious as opposed to letting them play a little bit, which was the only real bad part of the game to me. Like if the officials had taken a step back, just backed off a little bit, I thought that game would have been even better if they just hadn't called quite so many penalties. The last thing I think we should talk about in the game, the Deron Bland performance was fascinating. He was getting blowtorched in the first half of that game. Overall, he's going to end up with a coverage grade in the 40s, giving up 8 catches for 169 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 first downs. But he had a spectacular interception, which was a fantastic play. There were multiple plays where he was sort of reading the route and running it for the receiver. Like he beat Tyler Lockett to that play by essentially running the route before Lockett could and getting there ahead of him. So it was a fascinating performance to me for a guy who's been, on this record-setting pace, still has a PFF coverage grade above 90 for the season, even including this game now. But in this one game was sort of trying to give it all away early in the game.
Yeah, I just looked it up really quick. First half, he had a coverage grade of 34.2. And second half, he had a coverage grade of 63.7. So it was a microcosm of what playing the position is all about. And honestly, shout out and salute to Deron Bland for being able to play it this way. You're going to get beat playing corner. That's just the way that it is. When we talk about scouting and things that you love about corners, a reason why I had Devon Witherspoon as my top corner last year, Devon Witherspoon, the second that he steps on the field, he believes that he is the baddest dude in the stadium. Like he believes that he's the most talented football player in the county, in the state, in the country. Every time he steps onto a football field and laces them up, you have to have that mentality to play corner because you know that there's going to be moments where that is not the case, where somebody's going to catch a great pass against you. He's going to moss you. He's going to beat you with a great route. And you have to be able the very next play to go, I don't care. I'm going to get the next one. Doesn't matter. And playing corner, if you don't have that bounce back mentality and that overabundance of confidence to allow you to think that way, even when Metcalf is taking one to the house on you and then he beats you for another touchdown. And then who was it? Was it Cooks Who had the touchdown against? No. I had that wrong. Who had the touchdown against Bland that got called back? Like there was another one that got he got beat for the touchdown and then it got called back on him. So there was even a touchdown that he gave up that didn't even show up on the scoreboard. And yet he's able to come back in the second half, continue to play lockdown, continue to play confident, go get an interception. You mentioned sometimes run the routes even better than the receivers are running them themselves. And to me, that's a sign of a great corner. You don't want to be somebody who's so feast or famine like what we saw a couple of years ago with Trayvon Diggs, right? When he was breaking out initially, he was getting all these interceptions, but the variance of how boom or bust he was, it was like, man, okay, you're simply not going to get enough interceptions or forced incompletions to make up for how many yards and how many touchdowns you are giving up. Now he is a much more controlled corner with some of the with those ball skills still there. And Deron Bland, to me, is kind of in that same light where right now it's very high variance, but to me, you will certainly take that given how good he is at the takeaway mentality because you're hoping, hey, next year, the year after that, he's only going to be a more steady and lockdown player where he'll still have those ball skills to him where those opportunities present themselves, he can go and get it. So, yeah, shout out to him. Unbelievable game. Love the bounce back mentality. And that was one of my takeaways as well. At the end of the game, I was like, damn, that's what corner. Well, I don't want to say that's what corner is all about because some guys can just have a very quiet night and that's what you want too. But being able to have that bounce back confidence is such a key part in sticking around this league for a long time at that position.
Yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigba had that touchdown just before halftime that ends up getting overturned and becomes a pass interference penalty instead, but could easily have been the third touchdown against him in that game. Another player I want to give credit to for a bounce-back performance was Reek Woolen, who got kind of sat down with a shoulder injury in the last game. He had a great game, a couple of forced incompletions here. But that we're going to transition into cornerbacks in the draft. But first, before we do that, we got to talk about Prize Picks. And the Prize Picks lineup, it's been getting kind of passed around the group, Tyler took a swing at him. They didn't go that well. Tyler gave him over to Eli. Also didn't go that well. But look, here are Eli's Prize Picks for this week. We've got Jared Goff, more than 260.5 yards. We've got Christian McCaffrey going for more than 0.5 rushing touchdowns. And we have Rashee Rice, the new wide receiver 1 in Kansas City, going for more than 47.5 receiving yards. So that's Eli's second swing at a Prize Picks lineup. We will see how he does this time around. With Prize Picks, of course, you can also do all sorts of other things, such as playing with some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andy Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks also offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player that exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. All right. I asked you yesterday, as is the way we do this, give me a few names, the top corners in this year's draft class, so that I can at least have a quick cursory scan of their tape and we can discuss. And you gave me 3 names. Other people pitched in more names that you can mention. I looked at the 3 names and I have come to the conclusion that this is not a good cornerback class. Do you agree?
Wow. I would definitely push back on that not being good. All right, talk to me about it. So the 3 guys that I gave you to watch, who did you like the most, and what just didn't you like about the 3 overall?
Okay, so the 3 names you gave me Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. You gave me Cooper. Did we decide this is DeJean from Iowa?
Correct. Yes,
and Nate Wiggins from Clemson. Of the 3, I think Nate Wiggins is the best of that trio.
Okay. I figured that you would say that.
Right. However, I don't think any of them are even in the same vicinity as Devin Witherspoon last year or, Sauce Gardner the year before. I mean, I think they are a notable step down from that type of elite cornerback prospect. Fair?
I would not draft these guys in the top 10 like I would have been fine with drafting Patrick Surtain the second, Sauce Gardner, Devon Witherspoon, maybe even Christian Gonzalez. Like, yes, I liked those guys as potential top 10 picks more than I like these other players, but I don't think that makes them bad. It just means that we don't have like a crown jewel top 10 kind of a corner.
Right. But this is a nuanced show, Trev. There's a difference between there's
they
ground
stink. I wouldn't draft any corners, none of them, zero.
Yeah, right. I mean, my take essentially was like, if this is the best this draft class has to offer, this is not a strong draft class for cornerbacks. Now, maybe it's deep as hell, right? And there's a million guys at this kind of level. But the point being, there's nobody anywhere near, Devon Witherspoon, Sauce Gardner, Patrick Surtain, as you said, like those guys. Like Nate Wiggins actually reminded me a little bit of Christian Gonzalez. And this is, in order to sort of get this as a level set, as a context thing of what I'm saying, I didn't have Gonzalez as my number one corner. I actually didn't like Gonzalez that much. I had him much lower down than almost everybody else because as much as he was an incredibly fluid athlete, and I may be wrong about this, by the way, like he looked fantastic in the limited stuff we saw from him before he got injured. But like incredibly fluid athlete, like prototypical size, speed, all that kind of stuff, but wasn't actually that great at stopping people catching the football, which is fairly fundamental part of the job as a cornerback. He then goes to New England where it's a great landing spot for him. Bill Belichick, coached up, defense, all that kind of stuff. So maybe he becomes the player that he never quite was in college. But Nate Wiggins reminded me quite a bit of Gonzalez in terms of, incredible movement, fluidity, but he's way more lightweight than Gonzalez was. Like he's like missing 20 pounds or whatever versus Gonzalez. And that shows up a bit. But the same kind of thing in that he just allows the guy to catch the ball way more than he should for how kind of in close attendance he is in a lot of these coverage reps.
So Wiggins is somebody who caught my eye very early when he was starting at Clemson, like before he was draft eligible. I think that he was playing as a true freshman. And I remember watching reps where I was like, okay, who's that guy? Because he is different. And when you see players, best plays that just kind of pop out, it's very different than watching every single one of their plays and scouting them for an evaluation. So he goes through as an underclassman, and going into summer scouting a couple of months ago during the summer, I liked the ball skills, I like the movement skills. I think he is really explosive. He's really fluid. I like the length. He's 6'1", 6'2", something like that. But he's got a very slender build. And for some guys, that's okay. You can have some low body weight players who can still survive, especially at the cornerback position. But for him, it really showed up in contested catch situations, in dealing with press coverage at the line of scrimmage, and then, of course, like in run defense, like in tackling. He played pretty well to start the year, and then he got banged up a little bit. He didn't miss as much time as I thought he was going to miss, and then he kind of comes back from that injury, gets acclimated, gets closer to 100%, and I feel like as of late, second half of the season, he's been playing really, really well. And to me, that's a really great sign of, and that includes like the strength profiles of his game. Like I've watched a couple of his games since he came back from injury, and I'm like, whoa, okay, you're playing with a lot more fire, a lot more strength. You're more willing as a run defender, even though he definitely, I think, has to get stronger and add more weight. To me, I think a lot of people that really like Nate Wiggins as potentially CB1, as a potential top 15 pick, see him for what he was last year, what he was at the beginning of the year, and now what he has also been after injury. And through those three phases of his development, the arrow has continued to point up. Like he continues to get better to where, you kind of watch him right now and you go, this guy's still an incomplete prospect, right? I mean, like there are times when he doesn't have ball awareness that he needs to, he's not really locking down the other receiver. There are flashes of it, but it's not nearly as consistent as I would say that it is for like Kool-Aid McKinstry, but those are different type of athletes. And so I think the alluring part of Wiggins and why people are really in on him right now and I have him in the top 22, is because I think he's getting better. He continually gets better. And to me, when you pair the length, the fluidity, the movement skills, and then the ball skills as well, because Wiggins has a decent amount of forced incompletions, but last year he had like 3 or 4 dropped interceptions that he could have hauled in. It's like, dude, man, if you haul that in, like we're talking about a high impact player. So I think that that's still there for him as well. So to me, he's one of the younger players in this class. The arrow is pointing up. He's only getting better. That's why I think you see a lot of people maybe believe in him more than the tape says right now for what it can be as a future pro.
Yeah, I think he reads the game the quickest of the 3 guys that I looked at. Like he actually arrives too soon at the ball in a lot of these targets, a lot of these pass situations. Like, which is, I mean, obviously some of those are penalties, but like I think that fundamentally is a good thing. If you're reading it early enough that you're actually arriving before the ball, that's probably a positive in terms of your game relative to a guy who's a tick late every single time.
Yes.
Even when the ball arrives, you're not even going to make the tackle, let alone contest the catch. So yeah, and I also, he's lightweight. It shows up on tape sometimes, but I don't think he's tapped out in terms of how big he can get. Like he looks like he can.
No, I don't either.
And yeah, because Emmanuel Forbes, incredibly lightweight. It showed up on tape sometimes as well. And I don't know how much bigger that guy can get. Like you're looking at him and saying this might be it. Wiggins, I think, has the capacity to add some weight, and if he does, he can get himself into that Christian Gonzalez kind of realm of the sort of size, athletic profile, all that kind of thing. Let's talk about Kool-Aid McKinstry, because he might be the most interesting one to me. I know a lot of people love this guy. I didn't love his tape at all, actually.
Oh, okay. So you tell me what you didn't love about him. Like what was so? Because there are areas in his game that I don't think are like superstar level, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
So I'll in our getting back to the theme of this show, right? It started badly, which didn't help, right? It was the first couple of weeks were rough, and I'm immediately taken against him from that. It did improve, so credit him for bouncing back and getting in that. Unlike Wiggins, McKinstry is a tick late to reading almost everything, I felt. Like when he's got to diagnose the play, when he's got to work a route combination as opposed to just one guy one-on-one, even when he's got to read one guy just on a release package, right? Is he going to run the fade? Is he going to run the slant? It felt like he's a tick late consistently and is behind a lot of these passes, is behind a lot of these targets, is behind a lot of the plays. And that, again, was a little bit Gonzalez like last year at Oregon, in contrast to Witherspoon, who was always ahead of the play. I think he's definitely way better in man coverage than he is in zone coverage. And the thing that he does really well is running with a receiver down the sideline, right? That classic turn to the outside, get your body on him, lean on him, be able to maintain position on the corner or on the receiver and turn back and locate the football. He does that really well. And that's definitely an important skill set, and it's a difficult one. Like that's one of the hardest things as a cornerback to be able to do. Not a lot of quarters can do that well. That is his sort of superpower. That's the thing he does better than anybody else. And he's patient doing that as well. It doesn't look like there's not a lot of effort involved in it for him. So that's a huge thing in his favor. But I didn't love the way he read the game in zone. I think for a guy whose man coverage is a skill set, he was too easy to sort of shake with like a misdirection thing. I'm going to show you this thing and then go in the other direction. Like he was way too easy to separate from in that direction. I don't know. I think there's a lot of rough tape on his reel.
I think so. To what you said about his strength, I agree completely, and that holds a lot of weight for me. Being able to play a press man style where you are going to have your back to the ball quite a bit, and for him to be as comfortable as he is with his back to the ball, and also to have the timing that he does, because he has some of the most forced incompletions in the country over the last 2 years. The only player in the FBS who has more forced incompletions than he does is Quinyon Mitchell, who we didn't watch for this, but he is also having another fantastic year, the cornerback from Toledo. Steve actually shouted him out in our little Slack channel. He was like, watch him. And I was like, yeah, he would be the next guy that I would want you to watch. So Mitchell has the most forced incompletions. I think he's got like 34 in the last 2 years, a lot. And then McKinstry has 27, which is second most in the FBS. And I think that's because he played receiver in high school as well as corner. And so he understands the receiver's body language, mentality, and timing of when the ball is probably going to come. Like the things that you do, the eyes, people talk about like watching the eyes and the eyes get big, but it's more than that. It's kind of the nuance of how the body works when the arms are coming up, the timing of how far we are deep down the field. So he's got a really great feel for when the ball is coming and being able to play with his back to the ball, which I think is incredibly valuable. So I agree with you there. I share in your concern with a little bit of the lack of anticipation and a little bit of just overall elite athlete of playing corner. And it's not great when you have those concerns, but the concerns aren't, I don't know. I don't feel as though they're detrimental. When I watch him, it's like, okay, I wish you recognized this a little bit more. Maybe I wish you had a little bit more recovery speed here, because that's also why I feel like his interception numbers are low, because he is just a tick slow to see something. But to me, it's not I don't see it as much of a fatal flaw as you do, at least from what I have seen from him this year and last year. So instead, I just see a guy who, maybe he's not going to be a big turnover machine for you, but he's just going to be a really solid cover corner. And I feel like his floor in the league is like a really solid CB2. And if that's your floor for a position that has so much variance, to me, knowing how many corners NFL teams need right now, that also holds a lot of value for me. And because the NFL draft, it's a game of risk, right? You're taking a chance, you're taking a bet on a guy. And to me, to have a player who has as high of a floor as McKinstry does for the position that he plays, that holds a lot of value in my book.
Yeah, I mean, one of the notes I've written down is like I think his recovery speed and angles and things are really good. Like if he gets out of position, he's consistently getting back in position pretty quickly and efficiently. Like takes the right angle to the place he's going to need to get to, given the space that he's opened up. I just wish he didn't need to use it as much. Like if he read that initial move better and was in position to live with the move all the way along, because in college, quarterbacks are slow, right? They don't read what happened immediately. They don't fire the ball. In the NFL, if you give up that 2 yards of separation on the break, the ball's there. And your recovery speed is now not to contest the catch. It's to like prevent yards after the catch. It's to stop him before he runs 25 yards away from you. That is a little bit of a concern to me for him.
I don't see it as much of a detrimental concern as you do.
All right. Let's move on to Cooper DeJean from Iowa. So
he's, you want to go or you want me to go?
Well, I mean, I talked to you before we went on. It's like second.
Do you think he's a corner or safety?
So I don't think he's as good as Riley Moss was coming out of the same defense a year ago.
Oh, wow. And when did Moss go? Was Moss a fourth rounder?
Yeah, not high.
Yeah, but DeJean's so much bigger and taller and stronger than Moss is.
Is he?
And he might be just as athletic. I mean, Riley Moss is a crazy athlete, so maybe not just as athletic, but his weighted just athleticism is going to be way better than Moss's was.
They're like listed in a similar range, aren't they? Riley Moss was the third round pick.
Okay.
So Riley Moss is listed at 6'1", 194. Cooper DeJean is listed at 6'1", 207. So he's got 10 pounds.
All right, so he's got like 10 plus pounds on.
Yeah. I mean,
and I still think he's just as good of an athlete. To me, that matters as a defensive back.
I think he's a solid athlete. I don't think his feet are as good as Riley Moss's were. Like one of the things that impressed me.
He has a little bit heavier feet, and that's the one that is the biggest reservation that I have with him playing outside corner, because he played outside corner for Iowa for the last 2 years. Some people project him as safety, and I also wouldn't mind him at safety. Like if you told me that this guy was going to be able to play a little bit of the Antoine Winfield Jr. role, where he could play free safety primarily. He could come in the slot and play up against bigger wide receivers because he's got the size. Or you could kind of like bring him down in the slot and you could let him blitz off of the edge because he has the size, I think, to be able to do that, hold up at the NFL level. That's a role that I could envision for him having a lot of success, because he's also I think he's got great instincts. I think the way that he reads the field, how he reads space, they play him in off coverage a lot. And when you see a guy who is 6'1", 207 pounds as a corner, you kind of want to see what he can do in press, right? You want to see him go up against these bigger receivers. Hey, go up and press coverage and play man against the X. And they just don't ask him to do it very often. Yeah. They play a lot of off cover 3 and off quarters at Iowa. So we just didn't get to see a lot from him there. And in those instances where he had to like turn and run pretty quickly, yeah, his feet are a little slow off the jump, but I think he's really explosive and has good top speed. And because of that, you see great recovery and it doesn't often get him burned. Now, would it at the NFL level? Yeah, maybe that's a question there. And ultimately, that's why I think people have the debate of, is this guy a safety or is this guy a corner? But the way that he reads space, the ball skills that he has, and then how he turns into such a playmaker once he gets his hand on the ball, so valuable to me. I think he's just one of the best playmakers that we have in this draft class. And so that's why I wanted you to watch him specifically for these 3.
Yeah, he would be really interesting at safety. It's a frustrating defense, that Iowa defense, in terms of projecting cornerback to the next level, because it is so sort of protected in terms of what they ask those guys to do. Riley Moss was interesting to me because I actually really liked him as a corner, but his biggest flaw was he just kept sort of mistiming his contested attempt at the catch point. And like, he was right there, he would jump, he would contest, and somehow the ball would get by him. Like, as he would turn to look for the ball right as it sailed past his head. And he somehow did this so many times that you're like, it feels like every single one of these is just bad luck. But can you have 20 plays that are bad luck like this in one tape reel? Like, that seems to suggest a consistent problem with your game, as opposed to somehow 20 times in a row you timed your look for the exact wrong moment and the ball went by your head. DeJean doesn't have that. Like, he actually contests well at the catch point. He times it well. So but I thought Moss had better feet than he did. I thought Moss's change of direction and short area stuff was better. But DeJean is actually really good. His best plays come in that cover 3 look, where he has that sort of sideways shuffle Richard Sherman technique that they run at Alabama a lot as well, and that Sherman did in Seattle for years. He has some really nice reps of that on tape, where, you know, he's varying his pace, he's protecting the kind of underneath stuff in case the receiver breaks it off, and then when he finally takes it vertical, he just glides with him and then does contest it at the catch point, which again plays into that kind of, that's a very similar skill set to some safety roles. I would definitely be intrigued in seeing him as a free safety as well.
So that was going to be my question for you, is kind of like the way that you view him, because I think he can play outside corner, but there's a lot more of a projection than you want, because you could play him. You can play him in cover 3 systems, but how many teams in the NFL are just playing like pure cover 3 now? There's not a lot. So you're going to have to ask him to do a lot more than that. Does he have the footwork to do that? I think he does. So I still have him at corner, but the month of December is going to be pretty big for me and for the PFF big board. We're going to go through a lot of different data points and a lot of different film now that the regular season is done. A lot of these guys are going to opt out of the bowl games if they're not in the college football playoff. So the month of December is a big like film recheck month. And I'll kind of look at him with the question in mind, like, okay, where do you honestly project him to be the most successful? And it might be at safety, because I have him in both rankings right now, and I like him in both, but I might end up just saying like, all right, if you start him at outside corner, you can, but his best role in the NFL is probably going to be a safety. So that's a question that I wanted to hear you answer, honestly, when I threw his name out there.
I feel like he's somebody, I think you're just going to have an incomplete evaluation on him until you get him to do some of those things, right? Like, you're not going to see enough tape of his at Iowa of like, what happens when you're playing press man in tight spaces? You know, what does it look like then? I don't know if
there are reps, right? Like we have ways to like watch all of those press coverage reps, and I have watched a handful of them, but at the same time,
it's just not enough.
You look at some of those things and you go, you're not asked to do it a lot. Right. So there's not a lot of training here. There's not a lot of repetition here. So I'm not really gaining a lot by even watching this, because I kind of have the same takeaways. It's like, all right, well, you clearly just don't have a lot of practice doing this, but is it the fact that you don't have a lot of practice and you're going to get better at it? Are the feet going to get a little bit lighter? Or is it just kind of how your footwork is? Are you a little bit heavier footed for a corner?
Like if he goes to a bowl game, not a bowl game, an all-star game, maybe a week of reps would get you some information on that. Or maybe the first time an NFL team is going to have like a real knowledge of whether he's going to be that guy or you're going to move him to safety is when you get him in training camp and just spend the first week watching him do those reps, right? And then say, okay, that's probably not going to work, but don't worry, we like him at safety anyway. We drafted him with this in mind. I feel like he's that type of player. You're not going to know whether he can actually do that specific thing. So you're not going to be drafting him solely as that unless you get more evidence somewhere down the line, whether it's a week of practices at an all-star game or something else.
I would be key. I'd love to see it.
All right, talk to me about the other couple of names in this class that I didn't get to but that you've seen. What does the rest of this class look like? How deep is it? Who are the next names?
I think it's a really deep class. First and foremost, I think that like there's just a lot of really good slot corner dudes. Like there's a handful of players that can be really good slot corners. Jahdae Barron from Texas, Javon Bullard from Georgia, Max Melton from Rutgers, Mike Sanders from Michigan. There's just, I think Malachi Moore from Alabama, Chow Smith-Wade from Washington State. Like this is a really good class, in my opinion, if you need a nickel corner. Now, of course, you're not drafting a nickel, in the first round or anything, but there's going to be plenty of opportunity, I think, maybe even late second round, third round, fourth round, something like that, for you to get a starting caliber nickel cornerback, which we know in the NFL today is huge. So I think that there's some really good specific slot corner guys that are in this class with them. You got a handful of other guys that are going to make this really interesting. A lot of people love Terrion Arnold and his athleticism from Alabama. He's the guy who's opposite Kool-Aid McKinstry. You didn't love McKinstry, so I kind of think that you'll probably like Arnold better, just because if you didn't look at McKinstry and his style and see the glass half full approach to it, you're probably gonna go for the guy who's been a little bit more instinctive on the ball this year and had a little bit more ball production this year. So Terrion Arnold's one of them. I mentioned Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. He's had an elite coverage grade over the last 2 years. Denzel Burke's playing pretty well for Ohio State, although I wouldn't put him in that first or second tier of corners. TJ Tampa from Iowa State, 6'2", 210 pounds. I mean, like if you were looking for a big, long corner, like he's your dude. Now, he's kind of frustrating too because he's the same thing. Really great measurables for a press man corner. Don't play him in press man a lot. Like they just keep him off. And I think that has developed his instincts and his spacing, which has helped. But he's somebody who I think needs a couple more looks as well. Kamari Lassiter, I like from Georgia. The disappointing ones this year, still like Josh Newton from TCU. He's a guy who started at number 5 in my cornerback rankings going into the year. He struggled, been a little up and down, still like his ability. I still have him in my top 10 with cornerbacks. The most disappointing player this year, no doubt about it, has been Kalen King, the Penn State corner. Last year, King had a single coverage grade of 91.3, which is nuts. Like in situations where he was told, go shut down the other team's wide receiver, he had an elite coverage grade. That is so difficult to do. He's got really good athleticism. He's got fluid hips. He's got, last year, he certainly showed the closest to Devon Witherspoon's click and close type of ability and impact when it came to changing direction. And this year, I think his coverage grade's in like the 50s. I mean, he had a terrible day against Marvin Harrison Jr., which, okay, it's Marvin Harrison Jr., I get it, but you were once considered a top 20 overall pick at corner. You got to fare better than you did against Marvin Harrison Jr. You got to win some reps, and I don't feel like he won any reps there. He's just not playing with – I mean, his anticipation is off. His confidence is low. He's second-guessing himself. He's hesitating, and because of that, he's giving up a ton of yards, giving up a ton of catches, and he's just not even the same player right now. So he, to me, I don't even know if he's going to declare at this point. But you remember, I use this example quite a bit because it's the easiest one for people to recognize, but You remember when AJ Terrell had that elite coverage season? I think it was like his first year in the league with the Falcons.
Yeah.
And then the next year he had a coverage grade of like 58. And it was like, okay, what do we do with this dude? It's the same exact situation with Kalen King, where truly elite coverage grade 2 years ago or last year. And then this year, I mean, it's been basically every team's kind of like had their way with him. And I don't really understand how we got to this point, but he is somebody who I think a lot of people will recognize the name because of how high we had him graded preseason, but he's taken a pretty big dip.
Yeah, I mean, people were using him as like almost a stick to beat Joey Porter Jr. with last year, right? And in his sort of, they were like, well, he's not even the best corner on Penn State. Like, Kalen King is better.
Right.
So, like, no, Joey Porter's not a top corner. Like, he's the second best guy in his own team. And Kalen King went into the season as the expectations were he was going to take, the next step and be one of the top corners in the class, and apparently it hasn't happened at all.
Nope, it has not. It has not.
All right, so that's our little review, our little glimpse into the upcoming cornerback class of the NFL draft. Obviously, our in-season overview of it, and we'll return to that once we get to the offseason and we get into draft swing in its full entirety. And I actually get to watch more than just a cursory glance of all these guys. But anyway, that's our little view of this. We're going to kick over now to Vic Troha for the Boo Boo Breakdown. Okay, back after our Thanksgiving break is the Boo Boo Breakdown, our injury roundup with our guy Vic Troha. How is it going, Vic?
Good, Sam. How you doing?
Not bad. Good holiday?
Oh, it was awesome. It was nice to get a little break and splurge on some calories. So,
so the big thing I want to talk to you about today is coming out of last week's games. We had another Achilles injury on MetLife turf,
Right.
and that had some Miami Dolphins players talking about it. Javon Holland, I think, was the latest guy to sort of trash that MetLife turf. And I don't want to get too far into just trashing the MetLife turf, but I was curious whether, because that was one where you had a great slow-mo replay of exactly what happened, right? Mm-hmm. And it was nothing. He just pushed off, to start his pass rush, and his Achilles just snapped, right?
Yep.
Can turf affect that? Because as far as I could tell, like, there was no slip or anything. There was no obvious give in the turf. So the only thing that can possibly have affected it is like the hardness of the turf, how much it gives, how much padding is underneath it relative to grass or, a different surface or whatever. Right. But if that's the case, I mean, does that kind of thing affect Achilles injuries or Achilles likelihoods? And if that's the case, does like basketball have a way higher Achilles tear rate than football because, it's hard court?
Yeah, I think the terminology that is universally used by NFL players on turf is sticky. The word sticky. They feel like they can't get that give, their cleat sticks. You and I, after talking a little bit, I think are on the same page where I look at a play like Jalen Phillips or something like that, and you don't see why his Achilles would have snapped on that given just a normal planting of his back foot, or like a Cam Akers when he stepped backward. It looked like a routine play. That feels like the kind of play where, I mean, there are times where you're not going to want your cleat to get stuck in the turf, right? Where your leg is going in a weird direction, the fact that it sticks is bad. That seems like an instance where you actually want your foot to be rock solid. Like, the less it moves, the more it's firing force through the rest of you, which is the whole point in pushing off to explode into your first step. Yep. And I might be on the opposite side of a lot of medical professionals when it comes to this, but I have a hard time sitting there pointing out an injury like those two that we just talked about saying that's the turf's fault. It more seems like if it was going to happen there, it was bound to happen. And I think that it's just the way that his foot planted and the way that the pressure went through his Achilles tendon, not because his foot was planted into turf. It was just that angle, that mechanism. That's how his Achilles popped. But I do also think that the turf does play a significant role in lower extremity non-contact injuries versus grass. I think that is just the biggest debate is like, what can you blame on turf versus what is just going to be somebody's physiological response to the way they took off out of their 3-point stance.
Does like, does a sport like basketball have a higher incidence in Achilles injuries? Like, is the actual hardness of whatever it is you're pushing off relevant to whether or not your Achilles is just going to tap out one day?
Yes, it does. But again, the ways that players take off in like basketball is nothing like what you have the stop and start of football, where it's from 0 to 100 in a 5-yard sprint. So the role that the Achilles takes in a basketball is a little bit different. I mean, obviously the surface itself is way harder,
right?
But the role that the Achilles plays in basketball is not as used for like a sudden 100% tension load, versus where basketball, a lot of times Achilles injuries come when somebody lands and they land awkwardly and that pressure goes down through their foot.
I would imagine, just in relative terms as well, the body types in basketball are less harsh on something like your Achilles. Right. Like, you know, some of these football players are loading like a disproportionate volume of muscle weight through that same tendon, as opposed to a basketball player who are, you know, Shaq aside, all like fairly thin, lithe, you know, in proportion human beings, even if they're massive. Right? Like they're 6'8", but they're 6'8" and skinny, as opposed to 6'8" and loaded with 290 pounds of muscle.
And without, you know, squatting 500 pounds versus squatting 100 pounds. Like there's a lot of different variables that go into it. I mean, that being said, though, I don't look at like a football player like who tears his ACL or his Achilles tendon on turf to sit there and say, well, it's because of all these factors of how strong they are and how much they weigh. I do think that there is a role that just the surface level, the playing surface, makes a big difference for these players. I mean, they continuously report on how they want to play on grass field. Mm-hmm. I mean, and obviously with you being an ex-athlete and myself, like I feel a difference. I know a difference between turf and grass, and just the toll it takes on their body. So I understand where the players are coming from here.
Yeah, I mean, turf, every turf I've played on feels horrible. If I given the choice, you would obviously want to play on grass. Now, I think grass has negatives as well. Mm-hmm. Like there are turf surfaces where simply cutting and stuff feels way better, because you can stick your foot in the ground, it will stick, and you can make as hard a cut as you want, right, and know that it's going to be like your foot is going to be there. Whereas in grass, there are times where you stick your foot in the grass and it's just like slips right out from underneath you, and you see that like anytime there's a game on grass, you see just constant slipping, players falling, like players not being able to keep their footing. So like there's a downside to it as well, but it does feel way better just in terms of impact and like the wear and tear that you would get off a grass surface. Oh, like I can never figure out how, I mean, forget like they're way better now than they used to be, but you ever see those games of kind of old school AstroTurf where it's like a carpet on concrete? Yeah. I mean, how players ever played on that stuff is insane.
It's like rubber on a slab of concrete. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how you could ever like be driven into that and then get up and, you know, play the next down or whatever is absolutely insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And like then, you know, it kind of reminded me of Lamar Jackson a couple weeks ago. I felt like he couldn't stay on his feet. He was slipping so much on grass. So there is a difference there. You know, there's so many interesting things that are coming out with this debate of turf and grass. And one of the fascinating things that I find is that like the really trusted research studies, like I'm talking about the, you know, Journal of American Sports Medicine, they even find, not only across football, but across all sports, that there's a higher rate of ankle and knee injuries on turf. But the NFL comes out and they did this big push towards, well, it's not necessarily statistically different, because in 2021, there wasn't a huge increase or difference between turf and grass. So they mark that year, and they're, you know, blowing that out in their studies and their articles, saying, well, there's not really a big difference. But just the following year, there was a major difference between injuries on turf and grass. So I'm kind of now like seeing what the NFLPA is putting out there, and they're kind of doing more long-term research. And another study basically said that there's a 16% more chance of injuries on turf than there is grass. So the NFLPA is kind of diving in a little bit deeper. So I'm interested to see what kind of comes out from all of this.
And is the general theory that it's that stickiness, the fact that your foot, your cleat is going to get caught more on turf than it is on grass, that is supposed to be causing the more injuries, or is it the hardness under the surface that is the issue, or a combination of all of it?
I think it's more towards like the stickiness and the lack of give. So in order to define something through the NFL Association and the NFLPA, they define a turf-related or surface-related injury as a non-contact lower extremity injury.
Right.
So ACL tears that happen because of somebody getting hit below the waist, that doesn't count. But when you break it down like that, where it's non-contact, normally what ends up happening is the player's foot will stick, and then their upper knee or their calf or something like that has too much pressure applied to it, and then they have a tear or they have a sprain. And that's where you start to see some of these injuries increase on turf versus grass.
Because you would think like it's almost counterintuitive in that when you're sort of thinking of non-contact injuries in particular, you would think like the times where you slip would be when something could go wrong, right? You slip, you roll an ankle, or you slip and your knee is in a weird joint, weird angle when weight goes through it, but actually it's the reverse. It's the time where it sticks unusually, and weight goes through it that
where
causes more problems.
Exactly, where you'd almost want a little bit more give under your foot to kind of absorb that shock. And I just find it funny because even, I'm not the biggest soccer fan, but the World Cup being played in the United States, when they come out and say they refuse for their players to play on turf, they have to play on a hybrid field. I mean, that's a industry in itself that does enormous amounts of study for injuries, and they're even claiming that they want, artificial, hybrid turf, kind of like what Lambeau Field has, right? They have the artificial grass and turf combination. Well, they're usually lower on the injury list when it comes to their playing surface, and they kind of are that team that stadium that takes out the excuse of like, well, we can't grow grass anywhere. Well, in Lambeau Field, you're playing in -10 and you're playing in 100 degrees, so I guess it doesn't really matter.
Okay, let's hit a couple of injury players before we wrap this up. Jonathan Taylor is going to have thumb surgery, which is the latest in a spate of thumb injuries randomly this year.
Right. Yeah. Geez,
Achilles
Stafford
and thumbs apparently the two things this year.
Yeah, that's just the big trend right now. So the UCL injury, that's the same injury that affected Justin Fields and affected Matthew Stafford. Fields had a dislocation with it. Stafford and Jonathan Taylor did not. But this UCL is that ligament that basically crosses from the thumb to the index finger. And with surgery there, they're basically going to pin that ligament back in. It's going to be 2 to 3 weeks. And interesting enough, like I'm not worried about him holding the ball. I'm not really worried about that. I'm worried about him catching and pass blocking, because those are the times where he's going to like have his thumb extended backward and really stress that ligament. So
you're picking up a blitz with that.
Oh yeah, right. So
fun.
I do wonder if they're even just going to splint him. A lot of times they do like an external brace where like they just allow that thumb to just move forward but not backward at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out with that, but it's going to be a couple weeks.
Yeah. A couple other players to touch on. Chris Olave left the game last week with a concussion.
Yep.
Are we now in this world where if you leave a game with a concussion, you're almost certainly out the next week?
Yeah, it's interesting because the rate right now is 16 days. 16 days is the average time people miss for a concussion.
And that's not like mandated. That's just where we're ending up at this point. Like they seem to be, I don't know if it's deliberate or if it's just the way the protocol is working out, but it's gone from, theoretically you could come back, 4 or 5 days later and be good next week. Now we talked about this, I think, almost way back at the start when we were doing this, that rugby mandated like a 14-day stand down after a bunch of like same week returns happened. They were like, this is crazy. You're going to have to stand down for 2 weeks. And the NFL hasn't mandated it, but they seem to be ending up in more or less the same place.
Right. Sam, do you think that like players with concussions now are more honest about their symptoms, especially after seeing like what happened with Tua and some of these, earlier retirements because of concussion? Like first name that comes to mind is like Luke Kuechly. But like, do you think that they're just being more honest with their symptoms and they have to pass protocol based off of their symptoms and they're telling the truth about it?
I mean, I think they would self-report now in a way that probably didn't used to happen. Right. Like, particularly like the next day, the ones where they play on in the game or they get tested and they're still good and they go back. And then on Monday, they go in the concussion protocol. like those are the ones where they're self-reporting. That probably never used to happen. Right?
You're seeing that now more than ever.
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
And so those are the ones I think that are legit. But I think I doubt it's that, as things go on, they're sort of being more honest about the return to play type of stuff. I think it's just that, like, I'm sure they could be on the field earlier, but I'm sure they're being held out, like, deliberately beyond that first game back after the Tua stuff.
Right. And I do think that this is a dynamic that I kind of overlooked when they started talking about head injuries and CTEs and concussion symptoms that can really affect players. A lot of that was targeted to, like, fans and safety of the NFL and ownership. But really, it's hitting home with the players as well. And that exposure is really, I think, getting to the players to understand, like, this is not something to mess with. Like, if I have symptoms of a concussion the day after, I'm going to report it. I'm not going to just try to play through practice. So
yeah, I mean, I think that whole Tua dynamic last year, like, shifted everything. Like, the NFL had a pretty close glimpse of, like, the worst case scenario of all this. It was all abstract before that, right?
Yep.
And I think every sport deals with this, that it's, you kind of know, but the human brain is very good at cognitive dissonance, like just dismissing information that you're not that interested in bringing on board. So you sort of know, if I take this hit, CTE down the line, whatever, but it's, I need to play this week. Whereas last year you got this look of what can go wrong if you mess around with it and you don't take it as seriously as you can. I think other sports have sort of stepped in and done something before it got to that. Yep. The NFL got to look at what it would look like, and I think that shifted everything. Like, both how they treat it, how players treat it. I think the whole thing shifted off the back of Tua's injuries.
100% agree. That mental image really was ingrained into a lot of people watching that game, so I think it definitely is stuck.
One last guy to hit on the way out. Keenan Allen is still out of practice now for a while with quad injury.
Yeah.
Obviously, for the Chargers, this is potentially catastrophic because he's like the only receiver left standing that's been producing for them.
Yeah.
And it's a soft tissue injury, which is immediately worrisome.
Yeah, it's a soft tissue quad. You're seeing after return from a quad injury about a 26% decrease in productivity and snap rate. So he played 98% of snaps last week. And you're telling an injured quad to go out there and try to do 98% again on a 3-hour game, it's going to be tough for him to come back and be a full. But you also wonder at what point are the Chargers looking at their lineup and saying, hey, man, we need you. Even like a gimpy, Keenan Allen is probably better than some of their other options. So
yeah, I mean, they've been in trouble with Keenan Allen as their number one, like, only receiving option. If they suddenly have to go into a game without him there at all, I don't even know what they're going to do at that point.
Well, I mean, even if they throw the ball to Quentin Johnson, it doesn't work out well for him.
Right.
So.
Anyone else you want to hit on the way out?
No, I think that, for the past 2 weeks, even through the Thanksgiving Day break that we had, there wasn't any huge significant injuries other than like Jalen Phillips. So I do think that we kind of dodged a couple bullets on that one.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's Boo Boo Breakdown, our return, and that'll do it for the PFF NFL podcast this week. So thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.